Hey listeners, thank you so much for listening to HRN. We want to make your experience as a listener even better, and to help us do that, we'd love your input on our audience survey. It'll only take a few minutes, and by completing it, you can enter to win a $250 gift card from Goldbelly. Visit heritageradionetwork.org/survey to take the survey and to help us keep growing and improving. That's heritageradionetwork.org/survey. Thanks for your support.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
This is Capri Cafaro, host of Eat Your Heartland Out. This week, we're heading out to the prairies of North Dakota to learn about the marvels of honey and many of its sweet uses. Meet John Miller, the man driving his family's migratory beekeeping business. And then learn how John Kesselring uses honey in the mead he makes at the North Dakota vineyards that bear his name. That's all coming up next. John, it's wonderful to welcome you to Eat Your Heartland Out. Another incredible time where I very, very rarely have an opportunity to speak to someone on this program that I've actually met in real life. So this is exciting for me.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
It's my pleasure. I had such an incredible time, albeit I may have freaked out a little bit, in the bee swarm there in the full bee suit. But I learned so much, and I really wanted to have another opportunity for you to share your story with our audience here on Eat Your Heartland Out. I know you're incredibly busy, and you're always, you're a busy bee, pun totally intended. Tell us where you are now. Are you actually like on tour with the bees, or are you just out of North Dakota because you're out of North Dakota?
The honeybees stay in North Dakota until about January 5th.
Okay.
When they head for the almond orchard. We're in the process now of preparing them for winter. We put them inside a climate-controlled building in Gackle, North Dakota. That's Gackle, Gackle, for those of you with a bucket list. The bees go in for about 65 to 70 days, where they reach a deeply dormant state. And we find the science is not in question, as this is a better way to keep a beehive in the winter.
So we've definitely skipped a little bit ahead because
right.
I've met you, so I know a little bit of this process and the backstory. But for folks that are not familiar with beekeeping and apiaries, give us the 101 on what this looks like at a very small scale, and then maybe at the larger scale that you operate.
Sure. A colony of bees is a multifunctioning superorganism. And each day, individual honeybees alight from the colony grocery shopping. We place the bees where the grocery shopping is abundant throughout the year. For example, in January and February and March, we'll be in the almond orchards of California. After that bloom has concluded, those same colonies may then go to plums or apricots or cherries or apples, for example, in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
Once that bloom is concluded, say at the 20th of April, depending on the location of the colony, we'll again place the colony on a truck and send it to North Dakota for summer. And summers in North Dakota, North Dakota is kind of the last best place in America for a colony of bees in the summer. There they find sweet clover and alfalfa, sunflowers, buckwheat, canola. They find crops to forage on, gathering pollen and nectar for the well-being of the hive. After fall comes, which is this time of year, frost is in the air, plants shut down. So do the colonies, because the colony, again, it's this superorganism that's in tune with the height of the sun and the length of the days and the outside temperature and the abundance or scarcity of nectar and pollen from flowers.
Mm-hmm.
All the signals this time of year are signaling the colony to prepare for a long dearth of nectar and winter. And bees have been doing this for such a long time. We smile when we say there's winter bees and there's summer bees. But there are clear morphometric differences between a summer bee built for foraging and gathering in abundance and a winter bee designed for long-term survival, scarcity of resources, and efficiency in the colony.
How do they differ? How can you tell?
Well, physically, they resemble, a summer bee resembles a winter bee that way, but their behaviors, their metabolic rates, their propensity to fly, all those things are informed by the superorganism. See, the beauty of this is, Capri, everyone obeys. No one's giving directions.
I got a chance to witness this, and I would say anybody who wants to like look this up on YouTube of like how sort of bee colonies behave, and certainly you all can tune in next year to season 2 of America the Bountiful and see John and his particular bees and me in a bee suit with a particularly hilarious face, but anyway. It is really incredible to witness this kind of communal behavior of these bees, and what you just described, that everybody obeys but does not give direction. It's hard to describe if you don't see it in person.
It really is. And I just have this front row seat with the best job in the world, trying to understand how best to husband these colonies.
Yeah, it's like organizational behavior, like sociology in its own way.
Except I don't speak bee and they don't speak human. So
Well,
we have to be careful with each other and observe carefully and make informed choices.
yes, and use that smoke billowy thing. What tell folks what that is? It's a tool, at least from what this is a layperson's description, but it is a tool to help kind of direct the bees in the way that you are hoping to get them to go. When you're kind of fussing with them, if that makes sense, because they're not particularly accustomed to. They don't speak human, and we're fussing with them.
Correct. So we approached the colony and we took the lid off. Now, for us, we're just taking the lid of the colony off. It keeps rainfall from falling into the beehive. If you're the honeybee, somebody just ripped the roof off my house.
Right.
And so your behavior is immediately defensive, right?
Of course.
Of course it is. So the smoker, think of the old blacksmith shop and the bellows and how the bellows blew on the coals and the coals got warmer so he could fashion the metal. The same principle applies with the beehive smoker. You take a source of fuel, it can be wood chips or pine needles or burlap, and you get this smoldering a little bit. Then using the bellows, like the blacksmith shop, you puff air through we'll call it the engine, and smoke emits from the cone, the top of the smoker. Now, for those of us that don't smoke, when we encounter someone who does smoke, and for example, smoke is blown in our face, what do we usually do?
Turn away.
Turn away. And that's exactly what the individuals in the colony do. It's like, wow, somebody's blowing smoke in my face. And so their instinctive response is fire.
Right.
So then head downstairs, head to a lower portion of the colony and start gorging on honey because they think their house is about to burn down.
Survival.
Yeah, I'm not going to burn their house down. I just need to better see what's occurring in the colony. And one way to do that is just to, we call it, smoke them down or smoke them back so we can do a better diagnosis in the colony. Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple, really.
Well, you make it sound simple. You make it look simple. To me, it's not a simple thing at all, but you've been doing it for a long time. And I think you need to maybe put yourself in a little bit of context and explain how you got into the beekeeping business.
Oh, dear. I'm a lifer. I'm generation number 4. I was in the bees about the time I was 6 and got a sting on the top of my head and had to go have a little cry behind a bush.
Oh,
But I came back, and there was, Capri, sometimes it's like the cosmos touches you on the head and says, this is what I want you to be.
yeah.
From my life experience, from FM radio during college to groceries for Albertsons, I always knew I would be a bee guy. I love bees. I get bees. And so it hasn't really been work, although my body would argue with you about that. It
Yeah, but you can tell the passion in your voice, and I can definitely, again, I can vouch for that. Having a chance to be there with you and the bees, that you dance along with their symphony, and you do get bees.
I do. And so like yeah, I've got the best job in the world. Sorry about all you other guys.
Well, I mean, you do make it sound great. I mean, and I will say, I was mildly petrified, but um, it was still so fascinating to me, and so important. And this is something I want to talk about because, over the last decade or so, there's been a lot of conversation about, the importance of bees to, the larger ecosystem, to our food system and food sources. And, you brought up earlier about how, well, the bees, you got to take them where the groceries are, right? The pollen, and they travel around, which obviously for them they're getting the pollen, but there's a good reason why they are also incredibly useful for the agricultural sector all across the country, because they fill a very, very important role. Explain that to us.
Yeah, there's two prongs there, and I'm not sure it's well understood. But let's talk about how plants, for a moment, plants need to set seeds, and humans like to eat these seeds. Sometimes the seed is on the inside, like an apple, and sometimes the seed is on the outside, like say, an almond. An almond is in the shell. But the transfer of the pollen within the blossom is necessary to achieve a fruit. And this is common across all kinds of vegetation, whether you're a berry or an apple or an almond or a pumpkin or a gourd. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So the production is made possible by this honeybee who long ago learned that plants will seduce her with a reward if the honeybee will transfer the pollen and make possible the seed. So we know that the produce sections of the American grocery store are bursting with food pollinated by beneficial insects, and the global champion, without question, is the Western honeybee, our honeybee. But let's talk about the other side. The other side is the nutrition derived by humans from consuming these fruits and vegetables and legumes all around the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, and here's, if you can stay with me for a minute, Capri, the consumer, I don't think connects the byproduct of beekeeping, the jar of honey, and the direct benefit of a produce section abundantly provisioned with nutritious food.
I think you're right about that. So connect the dots for us.
Yeah, connecting the dots is it's, for example, grocers, merchants, large production agriculture will say Zirkle fruit, biggest apple grower on earth, Washington State. They wouldn't think of not having honeybees in their apple orchard during bloom, because there is no question that the honeybee will exponentially increase the production of the apple tree.
Mm-hmm.
No question about almonds, no question about berries. It's just, that's been settled for a long time. The quality of the apple Zirkle fruit harvests at the peak of ripeness and then puts into their own climate-controlled warehouses is a better apple, a more nutritious apple, a more attractive apple than we've ever had. And this is by design. And the nutrition component of fruits and vegetables and all the things we've already talked about has never been higher, never been better. And so humans, we'll call them Americans today, have access to the most nutritious, most abundant food ever.
Thanks to the bee.
Yeah. So when the supply chain guy comes to us and says, "Well, what are you doing, Mr. Beekeeper, to strengthen our supply chains?" You kind of just look at them because the assumption is there will be abundant apples, healthy and good for you, in 27 varieties in the store. There isn't the assumption like, well, what if there's no bees? We're just kind of this invisible, kind of taken for granted gatekeeper of the food supply.
See, but I feel like in recent years the bee crisis has kind of, I wouldn't say it's taken center stage, but I think it is part of the conversation around food, within food systems and food system sustainability. That if we don't have bees, then we're in big trouble.
We are, and the honeybee is a sympathetic creature. Like we love the panda bears and we love whales and we love butterflies and we love bees, just not very close.
Right.
But we have this sympathetic figure, and we keep hearing these reports of bees are in trouble, and they are. Beekeepers just keep soldiering along because we have to keep our hives alive, and it's just part of the new normal. We got these bugs from Asia that are terrible, horrible, no good, very bad bugs, and we've just learned to, if not control them, at least mitigate their damage to the colony. So we're just getting by. It's just
but so tell us though. I mean, it seems like all this doom and gloom about the bees, right, and the future of the bees. But there has at least been some reporting that there is a positive turn on the horizon. Is that somewhat accurate? That there is some stabilization within the bee population, at least in North America?
Yeah, there's good news and bad news. The bad bug that came 35 years ago is called Varroa, and she's a tick, just like a tick on us in the spring or the early summer. It's a tick that invades the colony, and it damages the babies and it damages the adults. And we have learned through the use of organic acids that we can control this mite. We have to be vigilant, and we have to be in the colony about every 2 weeks and do the correct husbandry to keep the hive in good health. Mm-hmm. The bad news is there's another one coming from Asia, and Asia is the birthplace of all honeybees. There's like 15, 20 different species of honeybees. They all originated in Southeast Asia. And our honeybee was experiencing the same parasitic pressure 20 million years ago that the other bees were, and the Western bee moved. It moved to Europe, and it moved away from the parasites, and so it had this opportunity to become super productive and a wonderful bee. So now, in these days, as global commerce is on the wings of a 747 and on the deck of a
boat, yep,
these parasites move themselves around the globe with greater efficiency than ever before.
Yeah.
This bad bug that's coming, we do not want, but I think it's probably sadly inevitable that we will. But if we have learned anything, we have learned that a beekeeper from 1860 once said, "Beekeeping, generally speaking, requires relentless attention to detail. Thus, beekeepers are generally speaking grumpy."
Oh, but John, I don't think you're grumpy at all. Maybe you're the exception to the rule. I have a lot of fun talking to you, and I think this is a good opportunity actually to shift to something a little bit sweeter, which is the honey itself. Because I don't want to let you go without having an actual conversation about honey. which
Mm.
obviously is, the byproduct of the beekeeping outside of all these other incredible functionality that we've talked about in agriculture and the pollination and the nutrition and everything else. We honey is incredibly important and nutritious in its own right, but I think that there is this concept of honey is monolithic. It comes in the little like plastic bear, and we as consumers, like many other things, don't really have an appreciation of the nuance of how it may change if the if it's clover honey or alfalfa honey, as it is in North Dakota, or orange blossom honey in the California or Florida. Explain a little bit about how honey can take on different maybe flavor profiles, as well as nutritional aspects, depending on where it comes from, so to speak, with the pollinators.
Right. It's the flowers, and I'm not being dismissive here. I'm not trying to make it too simple. It's the flowers. If you walk through an orange grove in Visalia in spring, the aroma of the orange bloom is almost overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's in your clothes, it's in your pickup, it's in everything, and it's also in the beehive because they're foraging that nectar and that's coming from the blossom, and orange blossom honey smells like, tastes like orange blossoms. Same thing with, for example, we'll use buckwheat. Buckwheat is a
Hmm.
big, bold flavor that,
Yes, I remember. I think I tasted some out there.
yeah,
Yeah, buckwheat's a very different animal.
yeah, bakers like it because it imparts these robust flavor notes into
Yep.
the artisanal bread. But the consumer on the shelf in America is looking for a medium flavor, medium weight, medium color, because that's what we've been selling to them for a
Yep.
very long time. But the honey experts in your audience, they know what they're looking for, and they will chase down Tupelo honey in the panhandle of Florida. And some might chase down tallow honey on the Gulf Coast.
Hmm.
Others might look for that black button sage honey that only comes every so often in California.
Wow.
Or they may seek that gorgeous yellow sweet clover honey that is just the lightest, sweetest taste you'll ever have.
Yes, amazing. That stuff is amazing.
So it just depends, but it's the flowers.
Yeah, and I think that again, as much as our ecosystem, our surroundings are varied and diverse, the honey is going to reflect that. It sounds like, and I feel like consumers. I think to your earlier point, we're so used to this one sort of homogeneous, specific concept of what honey is. We don't recognize all of these different types that are out there that may have really incredible flavor profiles that capture where their surroundings, and it's probably worth going on the hunt, as those honey aficionados, as you just described, hunting down the Tupelo honey or the sage honey. I think it's well worth it. Now, if there are people out there that want to learn more about what you do or about just honey in general and bees, if the folks are interested and they hear this episode and they say, you know what, maybe I want to, be a hobby beekeeper and I have no idea where to start, what would you suggest?
If I wanted to become a beekeeper, I would check out extension in the state.
Yes. Yep.
California has an extension person. Minnesota has an extension person.
We got extension here in Ohio. I think, like, even for
Right.
beekeeping too. Yeah.
Right. So extension is a good place. A lot of community colleges do have beekeeping courses. There are online beekeeping courses. There's some great podcasts out there. There's two bees in a pod.
Cute.
University of Florida, Jamie Ellis. There's Beekeeping Today with Becky Masterman from University of Minnesota. There are trade magazines. They're kind of wonky and obscure, but there is the American Bee Journal and Bee Culture Magazine.
Bee Culture Magazine. Oh, my goodness.
I know. I write in it. So
that's awesome.
There are places, and there are hundreds, maybe thousands of local bee clubs across the country. And that's a great place to find a mentor, engage with that mentor, learn correct beekeeping, and enjoy one of the most fulfilling hobbies that a person can have in their backyard.
Well, John, if I wasn't totally petrified of bees, you would have inspired me to, be beekeeping in my backyard. But I'm going to leave it to the professionals. But I am so happy that I had a chance to experience it. I mean, as much as it was definitely overwhelming at times for me because I guess I'm a wimp. It was truly it was one of the most fascinating and awe-inspiring experiences, and I have such a greater appreciation for everything that you do and those bees, for all of us, because we are so heavily reliant on what you do to keep our agriculture growing. So, John, thank you so very much, and thank you for your advice to any aspiring beekeepers out there. And we look forward to continuing to follow along as you buzz around the country.
Well, you're always welcome back. You can always have another drive-by. I would encourage the listeners, anybody who is interested in production agriculture, the last week of February every year is the peak of bloom in the California almond orchards. There is no spectacle like that on earth.
Well, we'll have to check it out. Thank you so much, John, for your time.
This is Eat Your Heartland Out with me, Capri Cafaro. After the break, I'll be back with our next guest, Jason Kesselring of Kesselring Vineyards.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Welcome back to Eat Your Heartland Out. I'm your host, Capri Cafaro. Before the break, I was speaking with John Miller of Miller Honey Farms. He is one of 2 guests today that I met while filming an episode of America the Bountiful about honey in North Dakota. Now, let's welcome the other guest, Jason Kesselring. He's a wine and mead maker in the Cheyenne River Valley of North Dakota. Here's my conversation with Jason. Jason, thank you so much for joining Eat Your Heartland Out. It is not often I actually get a chance to bring someone on this program that I've actually met in person. So welcome.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about grapes and mead and wine.
Grapes and mead. What 2 better things to talk about, right?
Yeah,
as I know you all are getting into harvest season. Now, you and I had met as I was filming an episode about honey in North Dakota for season 2 of my TV series, America the Bountiful. And always get excited when I'm in the Midwestern states, because then I get a chance to sometimes feature, folks like yourself, both on Eat Your Heartland Out, as well as obviously next year, 2025, season 2 of America the Bountiful. So it's all about sharing stories and understanding people and culture through food. And I know you are very, very passionate about growing grapes and making wine and mead. So let's just kind of start from the beginning. How did you decide to start Kesselring Vineyards?
Well, it kind of started in tandem with my father and I, and in North Dakota, and I think a lot of the upper Midwest, even Western states, wild grapes have always been used for kind of just I suppose, a folk wine, for lack of a better term, that, just farmers would make it, maybe spike it with some sugar to get the sugars up. And, some of the more sophisticated people would understand that sugars were everything. And as far as harvesting these grapes and whatnot, they've been used for jellies as well, so it's just been part of, wild grapes have always been a part of, like, the Midwest, Western river culture. My dad grew up on the Missouri banks up by Washburn, North Dakota. So he was picking them when he was a child, and he has a lot of fond remembrances of them. So he was wanting to plant these when he established his farm in Kindred, North Dakota. And unbeknownst to him, they were growing wild all along the riverbanks. So he initially got some from another part of the Dakotas and planted those back in 1998, 99. And it was just a few plants. Long story short, I became very intrigued by it, and I'm spent a lot of time along the rivers just with my family. And I'm like, you got a lot of grapes just growing wild here. Like I'm sure you remember the bridge we were by.
Oh, yeah.
That area was one of the first plants we actually cloned from. And it was a plant that was really up high in an oak tree. And we got ladders out, Dad and I. And at the time, my kids were 3, 5, my wife, and we're climbing up in these trees and harvesting the grapes out of those. And, we figured out we could clone these things as well. And come February, we climbed back up there, took a bunch of cuttings from them, and propagated them the next spring. So that's where we started doing it. Just literally, that's kind of our thing, is we really wanted a wine that reflected, our family's landscape and heritage and the Cheyenne. So it's a huge part of it for me. It's just really the land more than anything in some ways. We reference other types of wine, but that was really and then the history, of course, we can get into probably a little bit later. But
we're gonna touch on the history and the Vikings and all that good fun stuff. But I'm glad that you brought up the fact that what you produce is kind of an expression of the land there. I think that's one of the reasons that we were really drawn to what you do, because of that. Trying to reflect the landscape and the culture. And dare I say terroir of the Cheyenne River Valley there in North Dakota. Now, I got to say, I'm from Ohio, but I had no idea that there were like wild grapes growing on riverbanks. This whole concept blew my mind when I was out in North Dakota, and the fact that they're just out there, just growing, and then the fact that you were able to essentially, as you just described, clip them and basically clone them and harvest them and turn them into what I think we would, the average person has in their mind as far as a vineyard is concerned. Really, the whole thing just really surprised me and was an eye opener, because I had no idea any of this stuff was happening.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, most folks, I think they just defer to thinking vineyards in France or in California, but really the history of grapes has always been, and viticulture has been, grapes have always grown along river banks. And really the first trellis systems back further even in the Romans were trees, and, they'd prune trees, they'd use trees as trellis systems, and then it developed and evolved, I should say, from there. So it's like we're kind of literally living the history of winemaking and viticulture in real time, what we're doing. And, it's funny, a lot of folks that know this really, I think they admire that aspect of it because it's so kind of primal as to the development of wine. You think of all the great wine areas of France, certainly, and even going to the areas of Eastern Europe. They're all based in Germany. They're all vineyards based around rivers and great rivers. So, the river is incredibly important to viticulture. But we just don't think of it that way necessarily, that it's been so developed.
It's so cool, and the fact that you were able to, again, take something that was wild and cultivate it, is a pretty interesting sort of part of the process as well.
Mhm.
So tell us a little about the growing process and the cycle. Once are you picking them from the river still, or are you just relying on the ones that are cloned and kind of cultivated in your acreage there, or a little bit of both?
Well, we'll always probably be looking for ones out along the riverbank. But what we started was we kind of have 4 vineyards. The first one was from initially just the wild. And then the second vineyard we started pulling some from the wild, but we also, the best producers of Vineyard 1, we'd cut clones from those plants specifically. And then by Vineyard 3, we were cloning everything from our own vineyard. And by 4, it's all from the vineyards that we propagated. And 4 is like, we basically doubled the size with Vineyard 4. So that is a huge, and really probably are going to be our best producers, because it's all the primo sort of plants of all of the rest of the vineyards. And this year especially, it just exploded with fruit.
That's awesome. So, walk us through the type of wines that you make with these unique grapes there in the Cheyenne River Valley that, as we discussed, really reflect the landscape there. Are they sweet wines? Are they dry? Do you make a variety of them? What are you going for?
We initially, the first goal was to do a dry kind of classical red wine. And something akin, out of Bordeaux would probably be somewhat of a marker for us initially. So that's our 2018 right now. And then the other one was a more an aperitif wine, or a port style wine. We call it the Nort. And
yes,
that one
the Nort.
That brings in also honey to back sweeten with that, which is North Dakota honey. And that one is, kind of a lot of these things have been done internally to the family and friends forever. And then when we decided was it 2020, we really wanted to start offering, this to it commercially. And we wanted to start with those 2 simple kind of classical elements. As to what we got going right now, there'll be variations on the theme. Certainly, I'd like certainly like a sweeter one I have that is very promising. And, aging in barrels, of course, we do everything in Minnesota oak, and oaking, and bourbon barrels as well. We have that coming up.
How does that change the flavor profile? Like I'm always curious to understand how aging in different types of barrels changes the flavor profile of wines or any kind of drink that you make.
Sure. Well, if it's just in a simple sort of a way, the difference between oak can make a huge difference, but really oak in and of itself is one element where you get the kind of aromas of the smokiness, the vanillas, being imparted to the wine, but also an important part of barrels, as opposed to saying just put staves of oak in a tank, is that barrels allow for micro oxidation. And it's very slight oxidation that's going on with the wine that allows this flavor to breathe. It's like barrels breathe is a way of putting it, and there's a character to that is very different than I know a lot of hobbyists will use just oak staves or cubes or whatever, and that'll impart an oak flavor, but it's a little more crude. And the type of oak you use, we're using American oak, so it's a little more bold, where
Sure.
something like, out of France, you're getting something that's much more subtle just because of the pores within the wood itself. And then you go on to Hungarian wood, it's a little bit in between the two. So ours, we're a very kind of primal sense to what we do. So it's a very primal wine. In some ways, Dad always would joke that it's like going back in time. This is what wine would taste like in a certain way. It's a little bit rough and ready in a certain way, but it's bold. It's with wild grapes. It's kind of like, I'd compare it in some sense to like venison or buffalo compared to domesticated burger or something like that. It's a taste that's very, it's not like nothing else really. I mean, somewhat I've compared it. If I had to compare it, I'd compare a lot of the stuff. Our sensibilities are probably more the Eastern European wines,
Yeah.
which is kind of the cradle of they're the cradle of winemaking, really, the Eastern Europe, Black Sea area, of course.
I often think about Georgian wine, as a really good wine producing region that nobody ever really thinks about. But that's interesting that you mentioned that as kind of the cradle of wine civilization in Eastern Europe. And I love this concept of a primal wine because it is wild. So in comparing it to things like venisons and that kind of thing is such a cool way to try to capture the ethos behind, what you all are doing, and how you can communicate that through flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So neat. So we've touched upon all this history stuff. Bring us back, because I want to talk about mead too, obviously. But it's my understanding from talking to you all that the grapes there, that's in the upper Midwest, conceptually is what the Vikings and Leif Erikson and all those folks kind of came across, when arriving in North America. So, give us a little bit of a history lesson there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it's coming from an old Viking book called the Vinland Sagas. And
Worse than the sagas.
Yeah. So, which is great reading, lot full of all sorts of things. But a long story short, Leif Erikson, who is kind of the head of this crew, kind of got lost. They were kind of looking for something, but then they got lost and ran ashore. And what most historians believe is the northern part of North America. And they started exploring around that area. Well, as luck would have it, they had a German along with them that used to work in vineyards in Europe before he decided to become an explorer. And his name is Turker. And they kind of split up, and he went down a river, and they thought they lost the guy. And it's a couple of weeks later, he comes and shows up, Turker and his crew, probably a couple guys, and they have a bunch of vines in his boat. And they're admiring these vines they found along the river. And they decided to call that land that they found the northern part of North America, Vinland, which basically means wineland.
Vineland.
Or Vineland, yeah. And that's the basic story. And they thought that these grapes would be great for making wine. So they took them back to, I believe it was Greenland and then probably Iceland. And it's, they're kind of lost to the sands of time of what they did with them at that point. But they, it's not really known history that they had a guy that knew grapes along with them. And so some people are like, oh, it was probably blueberries or something. I was like, no, this guy, he knew grapes. And it was certainly the only grape they're going to be finding in northern North America is our grape, the Vitis riparia or riverbank grape. Cool. So it's kind of an interesting story there.
Very interesting story. And it definitely begs the question of what happened? What did they do with them? Yeah. Once they got back to places like Iceland, then what? So, I guess maybe we'll have to, do a little bit more digging and find out what the fate was of these grapes and if they made it back to wherever, the Vikings came from. And, I don't know about you, but when I think about mead, I often think about, Vikings or some kind of ancient, celebration I don't know, drinking, nectar out of a horn type of talk about primal, I guess. And so for folks that aren't familiar with mead, although I feel like it's gaining popularity, explain what mead is and how it might taste different from, other fermented drinks.
Sure. Well, mead essentially it's just a honey wine, and the components are really simple. It's just a matter of honey, water, and some yeast, and they ferment it. It was to the Vikings and to a lot of ancient peoples, it was a religious drink, as wine was, but mead, for some reason, I think of the association of bees and honey. It was even on another echelon of reverence, I suppose. And they associated with Vikings, they associated a lot with their deities. Odin and Thor are always drinking mead, and
as well they should.
Yes, and getting into trouble sometimes. But it's one of those highly revered in that culture for sure. And what we do with it, people are unfamiliar with it. I think sometimes people will experience it maybe through things like a Renaissance festival. There, it's a little more sweet. A lot of people that do market it right now, they're doing it more in the kind of Renaissance, I suppose, very sweet sort of dessert wine sort of flavor. I'm doing a little bit more, I say, rough and ready. I'm more, I suppose, in the Viking northern spirit of things, where it's dry, it's aged in oak barrels for at least a year. And, we have one we have right now. It's a mixture of clover honey and wildflower honey, all sourced from the Cheyenne Valley, right down the road from our vineyards. So again, keeping with a very local kind of terroir sensibility that we just want everything local. That's really the spirit of what we want to do, is to really reflect the landscape.
Why do you feel that's so important?
I think that is wine culture. It's what is different than, say, beer culture, though that's not necessarily true. But wine reflects the terroir. It's the growing patterns, the weather patterns, year to year. We have one of the most extreme, if not the most extreme, temperature fluctuations on the planet in North Dakota.
I'll buy that.
It's nuts, and so it's extremely hot at times in the summer. It's been up to 120 degrees, and then the winter it's negative 45, and I've been in it. I've had to prune in 0 at least. So our vines are able to survive that, and but it also, the vine it is in a sense like buffalo, in the sense that it's incredibly vigorous. So it is like sometimes pruning. Like this year we got a lot of rain, so it was like constant pruning just to keep it from overgrowing to the point of pulling itself off trellis systems, just keeping mildew and disease off the fruit.
Wow.
It's and I have a family member that does buffalo ranching. It's the same thing, the fencing and keeping them in the fence. It's not like, cows. It's not a sedentary sort of plant, and ours is like that. So it's a different kind of grapevine too than a domesticated grapevine. It just it's sexed, so we have to have males I try to have a few males within each vineyard, and though a lot being so close to the river, we get a lot of males so that the fruit gets pollinated in the spring. Most domesticated grapes, they're self-pollinating, so you don't have to worry about that so much. Never had a problem with it, but you got to keep that into account. So, and just the other weird thing about it, I suppose, is we are looking for, for our harvest time, it's the first hard frost of the year before we pick.
Why is that?
Well, it's the final cutoff. It's like it knocks the leaves off it, and it really curbs the acidity and the greenness that can happen from our grape, and condenses the sugar. It's almost like slightly dehydrates the grape so it's slack in the skin, and it's in a sense, I guess it's like almost beginning the fermentation process on the vine before we pick it. So they're slack and they're fragile at that point. In California, if that happened, it would be a ruined crop. But for us, since it's such a strong grape and the taste and everything, especially the acids, are really what we're fighting with any northern grape, really. And for these, that's what we want, is to knock that out and have the sugars spike up. And then we harvest, and by Halloween, we're usually stomping.
Literally stomping?
Yeah. Yeah, we literally do it the old school way. We get on the food grade boots and
wow.
get a crew, and we're stomping away. So it's a workout.
Well, I bet. How long does that take you?
Depending on the amount of folks, it's we'll do it probably in last year we had enough. It was like 2 stages. So 2 days. Basically. And we've done it in a day too, but it's, as you can imagine, it's a workout for anybody. And
yeah,
younger folks that do it.
Who gets involved? I can imagine this is a real, it could be, a community building activity or people running for the hills. So
yeah, basically that's about it. Is the 2 groups really? A lot of local folks, family, people that are keen on, we have people come from the cities, and they're keen on just trying it, So at least for the harvest, if nothing else, and the harvest is usually a 5-day process to get that done, and we have 6 acres, so it's all by hand, and we just go to town soon. Usually a couple days after the first hard frost, we're pulling the nets off, and everybody's out there cutting away.
That's amazing. Well, you got your work cut out for you for sure, but I can attest to the fact that it's an incredible product, and and the spirit does come through in every glass. If folks want to learn more about what you do, and if do you ship as well?
Yep. We sell through KesselRingVineyards.com, and our mead and our Nort and our wild grape wine are all available there. So.
All right. Well, I would definitely say check it out. I've had a personal taste test. And Jason, I'm so glad that I had a chance to share your story with this audience as well. And I would say tune in next year when Jason is on America the Bountiful, because you'll be able to actually see what Jason is talking about, which, all of this audio talk is not really doing it justice. It's incredibly beautiful property, and you'll really get to see that wild spirit that we've been talking about. Jason, thank you again for joining the program.
You've been listening to Eat Your Heartland Out. This episode was produced by me, Capri Cafaro. Our audio engineers are Liam Warner and Armin Spengen. Theme music by Jason Shaw. You can learn more about the show by visiting heritageradionetwork.org/Eat Your Heartland Out. Eat Your Heartland Out is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.